The president, as is his wont, has been giving lots of clues as to what he intends to do. So, just as in the Venezuela case, where he spent several weeks telling the Venezuelans that you've got to come to a deal, here's the deal I'm after, are you going to come to the deal? And they then, refused to sort of accept his warnings and listen to them. He then launched a military strike. He's moved the military force into the region now that can do this. There's probably a couple of bits still needing to come in, but he's certainly capable of doing it. So it really is now decision time for the Iranian regime. Do they listen to the president's attempts to avoid a conflict by, signing away their nuclear program and by stopping killing protesters? Or do they invite what is to come? And that is the choice ahead of us, but it's quite clear that's a scenario that's being staked out as we speak. The sort of most likely options are that there is a sort of a limited strike, surgical strike that tries to take out key elements of the regime straight away, just in a sense they did in Venezuela. In that case, of course, they kidnapped Maduro, the leader. In this case, they probably wouldn't do that. They'd go for a let's just kill, the bad guys approach. In the hope that that would then encourage the regime to come to order quickly. But it might also be the calculation of the intelligence sort of people that the regime could fall completely if pushed in a certain direction, and that might be preferable to the Americans at this point, because realistically, we've spent 20, 25 years, with the delusion in the West that there is some form of this regime that is more moderate and would be amenable and pliable. It turns out that none of the options in the past have proven to be amenable and pliable. The regime, frankly, is rotten to the core. It would make sense to remove it at this moment in time when it is at its weakest point since 1979. What the Americans would be looking to do is to work very quickly at degrading the military in this regard and making it quite clear that those who step out and now try and come out on the streets will be for the regime will be killed, which would be quite a significant disincentive. I mean, the point if they were to do that would be to essentially spur on a ground revolution, which could then proceed unimpeded from the threat of violence, which has of course quelled it somewhat to date, and would basically kind of sweep them out of power in that way. But the Americans would not be looking for a long, protracted campaign. It might last, a few days, but we wouldn't be thinking of I don't know, a Kosovo-style 1999 operation, because that wouldn't be the purpose here. I mean, it would be maximal force at the start to remove the key nodes of the regime, and then they'd be mopping up after that. They maintain a monopoly of force against unarmed protesters. I mean, that is obvious, and a willingness to use it. But they do not, of course, have the capacity to withstand the US military. So, the reality is the US are going to cause them damage. Yes, there will be reprisal strikes. Yes, they will try and, kind of launch attacks on America's allies and America's bases, potentially other targets as well. But the reality is that on a military level, they will not be able to withstand an American assault. And the question really is, how much damage do the Americans do and how quickly? And how does that change the calculus on the ground to make it seem that actually the regime can be toppled by people power because there won't be the sort of force stopping it? So yeah, against its people, it can win at the moment, but it can't win a protracted battle against an American military allied to its people. He's now got the capabilities, or almost got the capabilities, so it could happen at any point in time. It's worth remembering in Venezuela, he'd moved the force into the region for some time before he actually struck. Look, he's a president who doesn't want to necessarily use military action unless it's the option of last resort, which of course it should always be. You should never go rushing into military action. But if it is clear that the regime is refusing to negotiate, is refusing to comply with standards of human rights, etc., won't give up its nuclear weapons, he's got the capacity to do it, and past form says he will do it. So I think it could be anything from days to weeks, but I suspect it won't be necessarily months at this point because you've got to move things on as well. They've got the capacity to do reprisals. They've got missiles. They can lob at America's allies, Israel, the Gulf states. They can attack American bases. They can try and activate whatever terrorist proxies they have in different parts of the world. And they still, although they've lost, of course, the Hamas, Hezbollah, sort of access in that way, they do have units in other places. It's one of the reasons why, for example, it's so important to designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization. We know that in Western countries, and the EU has now decided to do this, we are slowly following suit, but it's very protracted. And we know that there are assets of the Iranian regime working here. So, we've got to, be alive to the possibility they might be brought into this as well. But this will not change the course of or trajectory of what will happen to the regime. It will fall. The only question is, how much damage it does on the way out. And of course, our job would be to mitigate that as much as possible and to ensure that they fell as quickly as possible. There's obviously kind of a concern about well, nuclear weapons, of course, in this sort of way. So everyone wants to make sure that there is the maximal, if you like, defensive positions available in the event of any military action against Iran. And as a result, I think the point of this is that the forces again being moved to the right places, defensive capabilities are being moved to the right places in order to ensure that any action goes smoothly and with as little disruption as possible. The worst option would be that the regime falls and is replaced by something similar. I can't see that necessarily being the obvious place this comes out because the forces are going to be degraded in any attack by the Americans are going to be the same forces who would take over. Um, More likely you could get a chaos situation where sort of Iran is just in a chaotic situation for some time. There's a lot of kind of inter-ethnic feuding that could come to the fore. Other countries nearby might try and take advantage. Of course, the best case scenario would be that a national leader along the lines of Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah, would come in and would steady the ship in a transitional way, ensuring that you would co-opt some of the elements of the previous regime, for example, learning from the mistakes of some of the other interventions in various places, in order to ensure a broad-based approach to going forwards. Now, if that were to be the case, and I think any action must be predicated on wanting that to be the case and trying to smooth that path as much as possible, although the ultimate choice will be the Iranian people's in this regard, then you will want to have things ready, as it were, in the wings for a sudden regime collapse. I mean, dictatorships go very quickly. When they go very quickly. They're there 1 minute, they're gone the next. And so, if one is engaging in this sort of action, there has to be some contingency planning for what the day after looks like. Although with the caveat that, of course, America is not going to put troops on the ground and is not going to be the arbiter of that day after. So again, part of this is can the people on the ground, the Iranian people themselves, when they essentially rise up to remove this regime, which they've already shown they want to do, can order be enforced quite quickly on that? And if you remember back in 1979, that did happen because Ayatollah Khamenei returned to Iran and basically that established the order. Yes, there were political shenanigans. Yes, it wasn't quite clear, but that did establish the sort of order of how things were going to go. And he ended up, of course, very quickly becoming the dominant force. So you would need a similar kind of, kind of take back to happen in order for that to be as bloodless a transition as possible.